given the time, we should make a start on the session. So a very warm welcome from South Welsh Chamber of Commerce and the NPTC group today. We've got, I think, almost 200 businesses joining us on the call today. Before we start, I'd just like to give you some webinar housekeeping. This is an hour-long webinar. We have got 3 speakers who will outline different insight into future workforce planning. And whilst I would say this is not formal advice, it should be a very thought-provoking session. The session is being recorded and you will be able to watch this at the end. We'll send you a link and you can share that with colleagues and other people that you would like to share that with going forward. With so many of us on the webinar, we have muted you all, and whilst you won't be able to voice your questions in person, can I please invite you to drop questions onto the Q&A function that you'll see on the Zoom webinar here. May I also thank all of you who pre-submitted questions. We're looking to get through those, a number of those as well, but we've had so many. I apologise if we don't get through all of those, but we'll do our best to get through some really good chunks of topic with our different speakers here today. Carwyn is the chair. I'm very delighted to welcome Carwyn Jones, and he will field a selection to the panel through the session at the end. And nothing more remains for me to say than to say welcome to everybody. I will hand over to Carwyn, who is the Honorary Chamber Patron. Professor Carwyn Jones, would you like to take over?
Thank you, Heather, and Bore da Bawb. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on workforce preparation for the new normal. What we're looking to cover this morning is what do we need to do in the future? We know that COVID-19 has changed the workplace. We know that there are different ways of working now, and how will that affect the way we work in the future? What do we need to do then in order to prepare ourselves for that future? How do we adapt our current workforce? How do we adapt our skills? How do we make sure we have the right infrastructure in place to work as we would want to? Now, we don't have all the answers today, but we are joined by 3 people who will help us find those answers and who will give their views on what we need to do in the future as we prepare for a world that perhaps is very different to the one that we have been used to. It's a great privilege today for me to introduce 3 eminent speakers. The first one is Jeremy Miles, MS, member of the Senedd, AM as was. Jeremy was elected for the Neath constituency in May 2016. He was a member of many different committees between 2016 and 2017. He was the chair of the cooperative group of Labour AMs, as it was at that time. Jeremy was appointed to the Cabinet as Counsel General, the Welsh Government's Chief Legal Officer, in November 2017, in an act of great wisdom by the then First Minister. Following the election of Mark Drakeford in 2018, he retained that role. Then he became the Brexit Minister. Now, of course, he's been tasked with the role of coordinating the Welsh Government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So somebody well used to dealing with an ever-changing situation. Secondly, we're joined by Mark Dacey. Mark, you will know, is the CEO and principal of the Neath Talbot College group of colleges. Mark has a very deep experience, very long experience in higher education, in further education, worked as an associate lecturer, curriculum development manager, head of department, dean of faculty and campus principal. He is an HMI, has been an HMI, and he was appointed as principal of Neath Talbot College on the 1st of April 2004, and subsequently Group Chief Executive on the 1st of August 2013. Our third speaker is Linda Whittaker. Linda is the Chief Executive of Titarian. She was originally an accountant, 30 years experience in the sector. She's worked for Welsh Government, she's worked for many organisations as a consultant, particularly on stock transfers. I mentioned she was in the civil service. She was the Director of Housing for Wales. She was appointed the Chief Executive of NPT Homes in 2010. That became Titarian in 2017. And Titarian has 9,000 homes, all based in Neath Talbot, and employs over 520 staff to deliver services to tenants and manage and maintain properties. You're very welcome, all 3 of you. Now, just to give everybody an idea of how this is going to work, we have roughly an hour. Each of our panelists is going to speak for about 8 to 10 minutes, giving us an introduction on their views on the topic we're dealing with today. And it'll be Jeremy, then Mark, then Linda. and then it'll be time to take questions. Now, the shorter the questions, the better. The shorter the answers, the better, panelists. We can then get through as many questions as we can. I can't promise, of course, we'll get through every single one. And just to reiterate what Heather has said, please submit your questions via the Q&A function. Don't raise your hand because I can't see you, and don't say anything because I can't hear you either. But that's the way to get your questions on the list, and we will try and get through, as I say, as many as we can. Without further ado then, I'm going to invite our speakers just to give their initial views on the future and on what sort of workplace preparation will be needed in the future. And if I then could ask Jeremy Miles to kick us off. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carwyn, and thank you very much for the invitation. Diolch yn fawr am y gwahoddiad to participate in this discussion today. I'm looking forward to it very much. So I thought I'd touch on three things briefly. Firstly, issues around the economy. Secondly, around the workplace of the future, and then the question of workforce. Drawing on two things really. One is the set of roundtable discussions which the First Minister has asked me to lead on to look at some of the post-COVID new normal aspects, and then some of the things as a government we've already been starting to do around returning the economy to activity, if you like. So on the economy more broadly, firstly, going into the COVID crisis, it quickly became apparent that Wales had some particular features in our workforce and in our economy which was slightly different from other parts of the UK. So we have a higher than average representation of key workers, a lower than average representation of people that can work from home, and we have an issue with low pay in certain parts of the economy, and there is some correlation between people providing high contact services in the workplace, so in retail and care, and low pay. So there are some particular dimensions to the Welsh economy which are particularly affected by COVID. We've all seen the discussion about a possible 10% drop in GDP this year. In Wales, sectors like tourism are obviously affected, but also those which depend on supply chains globally, so automotive and aerospace as well. And we will already know that those last two sectors in particular are also projected to be adversely affected by Brexit. There's been a 140% increase in business dissolutions in Wales, and regional inequalities are being exacerbated by COVID. The Centre for Towns report, which some might have seen recently, tells us that particular parts of South Wales and coastal communities are likely to be adversely affected. 22.7% of people in Wales are employed in 4 of the sectors which have been shut down. So there's a really serious exposure there. Looking forward, some of the risks we are identifying are around reduced capacity to invest in skills by employers carrying a lot of debt coming out of this period. Even those that have been drawing on government money, UK and Welsh government money, will still be carrying significant amounts of debt coming out. So what does that do in terms of investment in workforce into the future? And then possible loss of innovation as competition in parts of the economy may be affected as a consequence of some of the COVID impacts. Just in terms of impact on particular parts of the workforce, under 25s, 30% of those are in sectors which have been closed down during COVID. Women are overrepresented as against men in those sectors as well. So there are particular issues about the distribution of the burdens of COVID on parts of our workforce in particular. Some of the things coming out of the round tables that we've been holding, and these are really at this point they're sort of, as it were, challenges and questions to the government rather than concluded views of the government, but that's exactly the point of holding those, really, is to provide some challenge. One is around business support and how that looks in the future. One of our participants encouraged us to look at 3 different types of scenario. One is companies that basically would be coming back to life over a period of time and would more or less get back up to capacity. Then sectors where that was likely to be very long time coming, so in the hospitality sectors in particular, and so the imperative there they were suggesting was to help workers in that sector to retrain. And then in other parts of the economy, there are some communities where actually retraining for other employment isn't such a straightforward thing anyway because of the limited number of employers in those areas. So 3 sort of distinct ways of looking at it. There will be some new challenges which come from, if people do decide to work from home, more into the future based on the experience they've had. What does that do to the need for commuting capacity, the distribution of residential housing, the impact that might have on the distribution of broadband availability? So there's some quite big strategic questions which come out of, you know, even quite small behaviour changes which might carry on after this period. Some other challenges to us about using procurement in a way which can then support local supply chains even more than we're doing now, and then a clear recognition, I think, that whatever the Welsh Government is able to do, there is also plainly a need to make sure that that happens on a UK-wide basis as well. And so as well as developing a set of interventions on a Wales-wide level, developing a set of clear asks to the UK Government about how we look at job support into the future, job guarantees, tax credits, those sorts of things which we have used successfully in the past. And then obviously investing in digital and other infrastructure requires a UK-wide response as well. So that's kind of some of the broader things we're thinking about in terms of the economy. In terms of the workplace, well, obviously specifically in Wales, we've introduced during COVID the requirement in law for employers to take all reasonable measures to comply with social distancing. That's law in Wales, not guidance. So that's obviously transforming the physical nature of the workplace in any case. You know, you can see a system in the future. We're already talking to our public service employers in Wales about staggered shifts in order to manage pressure on the transport system and social distancing on that. Clearly, with remote working, there are other challenges which come with that. So workforce well-being and mental health, I think, is going to become a very clear issue, because this doesn't come at scale without consequences for people. And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about people working remotely but not from home. So dispersed workplaces where you could imagine sort of an aspect of working from home, less travel time, and a solution which enables employers to comply with the 2-metre rule. And on the other side, it is possible to see circumstances where our town centres obviously are going to come under pressure from the vulnerability of the retail sector. So using real estate in our town centres to deliver some of that remote working for other employers elsewhere might be an interesting thing for us to look at. We've already been working with employers and unions around protocols for the workplace for when people start to return in greater numbers, to make sure that physical distancing is complied with, and that affects all aspects really, from visitors coming into premises, car parking layouts, proximity in the workplace obviously. So there's a whole set of stuff around there which happy to talk about it at a bit more length perhaps in the questions. And then lastly, on the workforce of the future, there are issues now about pupils spending time at home, losing time at school. Not all pupils have the same access to digital capacity as others, so there's an inequality issue there. There's the issue of reluctant students, people not being keen to go to university even in this year because they don't know what the university experience will be like, and it's a lot of money to spend if you're not certain of that. So there are issues about future workforce we need to be very mindful of there. I've mentioned about both investment in skills and mental health issues, but I think these are both significant challenges for employers into the future, despite what is obviously going to be pressures on employer budgets. We are going to need to make sure that we're equipping workers for a very possibly changed economy in some significant ways, and also providing support for their well-being to be able to work in different ways into the future. There's a specific challenge, I think, about helping employees return to work in this climate. I think there's a particular set of responsibilities and challenges about questions around safety, worker confidence, and just the process of re-engaging in the workplace as a physical environment, which I think are all potentially quite significant challenges for employers, it seems to me. So those are just some issues, Carwyn. I'm happy, obviously, to pick up in more detail later on.
I must remember to unmute myself. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Mark.
Thanks very much, Carwyn. I'd just like to start by perhaps dispelling some misconceptions about colleges. We've been independent bodies for 27 years. Annual turnover for us is about 56 million, over 1,000 staff. We contribute about £500 million to the economy in the area. We offer just about every academic and vocational qualification up to and including degrees. And for us, we run 2 farms, we've got 2 theatres, 4 public restaurants, both in Wales and England. We've got a sports bar actually in St. Dacey. We also have 8 wholly owned subsidiary companies. So it's no longer just the local tech. And I think that's important for people to be aware of. Whatever the new normal looks like, I think there are 3 questions that we need to ask ourselves. Will our previous business hypothesis need to be reconsidered? How will the changes in values, beliefs of our customers, clients and staff alter our business model? And what enforced changes from lockdown can we take advantage of? So I want to put this into context in terms of the effect. We'd have to go back to the start of probably around 1706 to find a bigger slump than is currently predicted. And what is the new normal? I mean, the speed of change at the moment in different sectors is incredible. I mean, we've seen 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, but the impact is going to be huge. And the RSA predicts about 25% of the total jobs in Wales will be lost. And I think Jeremy referred to, for different groups, it will be different. For 16 to 19-year-olds, 40% of jobs, 20 to 24-year-olds, 30% of jobs. And that for men will be higher than it will be for women. So this is a completely generational challenge that we are facing. You know, we've already seen far less job listings on DWP and a huge increase in access to universal credit. And we've talked about jobs that can be undertaken from home, but you know, austerity in the last economic crash, the social divide now is massive. And I really do hope that Westminster will look at an investment solution, not just cuts. So how do we adapt our workforces to the new normal? The easy question, yeah? And Jeremy's covered part of it. I mean, we're going to see home working, reduced travelling, more shift patterns, existing shift patterns changing, social distancing. Even in customer-facing organisations, that's not impossible. I think we'll see small and consistent teams used for the physical teamwork. And there's definitely going to be more staff consultation. Anxiety levels are high. But on a positive, this is the kickstart, I think, that the 4th industrial revolution has been looking for. So there are positives to come. I think we'll see regular reskilling. I think that'll be the normal. I think we'll see employers far more involved in training, even devising programs and delivering assessment. However, we do need policy certainty, I think, to give employers the trust in making these large-scale investments. Some jobs will no longer exist, but actually, if we think about it, it is worse to keep people with the skills that no longer match business needs. So we have to move on. And I do think that your own industry is best placed to future-proof your own business. But you do need clarity around some of the general guidance around what the new normal should be like. And as lockdown eases, I mean, we're all planning movement routes around our various buildings, single entrance, single exit, hygiene points, only online payments maybe. And I suppose now an unrecognisable cleaning and hygiene regime. And I'm sure, you know, accredited induction will be part of this new process, ensuring that people are aware of, you know, what's being called the COVID secure type guidance. And one thing I do think is that with so many possible unemployed workers, there is a definite need to develop more than what's there at the moment in terms of a regional skills matrix for unemployed workers, to better match the changing needs really in our regional industries. These potential workers should be incentivized, or even actually de-incentivized, so that they do undertake the upskilling to match the new skills groups. This could have a positive and an early impact on growth. So where can businesses find help? Well, as you'd expect me to say, we can help you as a large group of colleges. But we have helped businesses. Swansea Bay Health Board have taken on over 400 apprentices in the last 2 years. And we have a team of business advisors who don't have the monopoly on wisdom, okay? They're not there to provide egg-sucking tuition, but they do have experience and they are there to help. And you wouldn't be aware, but you know, part of our companies, we own a recruitment company, so we can provide the full service from identifying from our high-flying students right the way through to managing the interview process. And I think we can literally manufacture the person to fit your own organisation in the new normal. One other thing I think, you know, small companies, the supply chain, I think are going to take the brunt of this, and estimates that 25% of small businesses could fail. Speak to us. We do have small business startup units, and 150 small businesses have been started up with this group already. So for us as a college in helping this journey, we do provide almost every conceivable area of academic and vocational qualifications, right up to and including degrees, as I said earlier. But not that people will want to study the classics with the NPTC group, but in areas like engineering, construction management, business and IT, computing, care studies, childhood studies, cybersecurity, those key areas where I think, you know, we are going to need to upskill our staff, certainly in the region and certainly in Wales. And actually, the delivery patterns that happen in colleges, not just ours, you know, we carry out site assessments, that we suit shift patterns. And, you know, let's be honest, we have over 30 years of delivering bespoke courses for industry. So get onto our website, contact our business advisors, we can help. Now, what funding might there be available to support some of this? Well, we all know about the job retention scheme, coronavirus interruption loans, rate reductions, and so on and so forth. But Welsh Government is making really quick decisions with less tape. And we can help you here. And looking at the delegate list, we've already helped many of you. Now, what you need to be aware of in terms of reskilling and training staff is that apprenticeships are fully funded in Wales. They're completely fully funded. There's degree apprenticeships down through the apprenticeship programs. The sector is piloting individual and personal learning accounts. So there are lots and lots of opportunities. And whether war chest is the right expression, we know that Welsh Government has a COVID-19 war chest, which will be there to help employers access skills. So I would say speak to our business advisors and visit our website. And to finish, I suppose, in general, I think really what we need to look at is a radical reform of lifelong learning. We've seen a 50% cut. We don't get traditional night classes, hardly. And the austerity-driven co-investment model didn't work. We've got to relook at it. I think household and in-work poverty is a disgrace, to be honest. I mean, food banks in the 21st century, I mean, I thought we'd have Buck Rogers and flying cars, to be honest. And I think we need to speak to our public service providers, police, fire and rescue, NHS, social landlords and social services. They can tell you the true economic impact of poverty as a result of this. We probably need a social contract or a new social contract between government, our civil society, employers and employees, recognising the changes in work, the demographics, family, technology, and so on as a result of COVID. And maybe a better welfare safety net, something like is suggested by the RSA about a universal basic income. Read the research, very positive for the economy. But we all need support through this crisis and beyond, to a point where the economy is actually creating jobs. And I know Jeremy mentioned it, but please, broadband throughout Wales. I mean, employers need targeted grants and loans to assist on the necessary changes post-COVID. This is why I think we need to say no to future austerity and yes to investment. Follow what current economists are saying about skills and about the way out of this pandemic. And no more cuts, please. I think this requires brave decisions and strong leadership, and that will get us to the other side. Thank you, Carwyn.
Thank you, Mark. And if I could move on now then to Linda.
Thank you, Carwyn. Well, as an organisation, we are a very, very values-driven organisation. We have strong social values, but also a strong commercial bent as well, so that we can make sure that we are sustainable into the future. Our usual business as usual would be doing up to 30,000 repair jobs on our properties every year. We have a turnover of about 700 properties, so each of those becoming void and needing works doing on them. We have a turnover of about £46 million a year, and as Carwyn said before, we employ over 520, sometimes up to 550 people during the year, depending on the season. We use a lot of local contractors, SMEs and suppliers, and that's a really important part of what we do. We try to make sure that every pound we spend, we keep as local as possible. And even when we have had to let contracts through ODU, which we have had to do on many occasions, we make sure that the way the contracts are drawn up are that the requirement on companies, even if they come from over the bridge, have got to employ a significant number, up to 90% of local people within 6 months of the contract starting. That might sound like quite an ask, but I have to say we've actually not found it difficult, and we've had much higher figures than that, well within the 6 months on many of the contracts. We also make sure that we look at community benefits within all our contracts, and again that benefits our local people, local colleges, and of course ultimately our tenants. I suppose when COVID hit, for me and my senior team, the main element was around a duty of care for my staff and my tenants. So we actually closed our offices earlier than was required by the government, and we had everybody working from home probably 5 working days before it was required that that's what people started doing. In terms of our repairs, we turned to emergency repairs only, and urgent ones where it was required, maybe if there were disabled people living in a property and they needed something. We also closed down all our communal areas within our sheltered schemes very quickly, because we felt that was an area where people could want to congregate, but that the virus could be spread very easily. We did it in conjunction with our tenants at all times, and I think it's really important to make sure that when you do something that you do take your customers along with you. So it has been very different for us. As I said, we let normally around about 700 properties a year, and at the moment the only properties that we are letting are emergencies for working with our local authority to house homeless families or people who may be at risk because of the virus. We've also made available flats to the NHS so that workers who can't go home either because there's somebody with the virus there or who is shielding, that they would also be able to access our properties, and we've done that free of charge. So how do we get out of this? You know, we've now been in it for 7 weeks. We have been running a service. Our tenants are still getting a service. Although we did have to furlough quite a number of our direct labour organisation, those that we couldn't redeploy into other roles, we actually redeployed all of our housing staff. Most of them are doing welfare calls to our tenants on a daily basis, making sure that they are either getting food or they're getting the support they need. And sometimes it's things that isn't anyone else's responsibility to do. So for example, I was told last week about how somebody spent almost a day getting hearing aid batteries to a tenant, an elderly tenant living on her own. Might sound like a very small thing, but I'm sure for that individual it actually meant a huge amount. And it takes quite a lot to get that from you know, having to do it remotely. So our teams are actually managing to work remotely quite effectively. What I would say is broadband is a huge challenge, and also at the moment, obviously with children being at home, and the requirement for broadband within households has been more of a struggle than we would have liked, and it's certainly more than before schools closed. But it is something that certainly, to get out of this, we certainly need to do that. both Mark and Jeremy have talked about, you know, what we do coming out of this and how can we really take the opportunity to benefit from what has been really a tragedy for everybody. And I think that what we've learned is that people can work remotely. As an organisation over the last 12 months, decarbonisation has been very high on our agenda. And we had been trying to get most people to work at least 1 day a week from home. By doing that, you're cutting your home to work carbon by 20%. Actually, what we've been able to see is that everybody can work from home. Obviously, our direct labour organisation already did, they had their vans, so they're working to and from, but all our office-based staff can as well. So what we're looking at doing now is, you know, because obviously we're going to have to abide by social distancing, is by saying that people can come into the office 1 day a week rather than work from home 1 day a week. But as already been mentioned, that actually brings its own challenges as well. Social isolation from working from home can bring well-being issues. And I think that's something that as an organisation, we're certainly going to have to look at. In terms of our wider economy, we've been in contact with our contractors all the way through this, although most of them have closed and furloughed all their staff. But what we have been very aware of is that, as I said, we're only doing emergency repairs. And although we've had many others reported to us, it's about 65% down on what we'd normally expect. So we have a huge backlog of work to do once we can start doing that. And we want to work with our local contractors to ensure that we're doing that, to make sure that those people who've been furloughed from those contractors are able to do it. And in reality, we wouldn't have been able to do that if it hadn't been for the furloughing scheme, so that we were able to furlough our own staff. But I hope that we'll be able to start very soon with effective PPE, which our staff have had while they've been doing emergencies, going into properties and start doing the urgent works and then the more routine works. But I think in reality, we won't be doing two-handed works for quite some time. And we will be making sure that the same precautions that we're taking now on emergencies will be taking on the other works. We're still carrying out with one of our contractors gas servicing. That is something that the HSE has not relaxed its rules on. So we've been, you know, we would normally carry out about 700 a month, which is quite a significant number when a lot of your tenants are not wanting you to access their homes. So, you know, that will become more of a struggle over time. But with adequate PPE, we can do it safely. And I think it's important that that's the case. But I do think that coming out of this, we can come out of it greener, cleaner and leaner. And as organisations like housing organisations, you know, construction is often one of the areas of work that kickstarts economies. It did in 2008 and hopefully it will do in 2020 as well. So I think that we will be calling on Mark for a lot of the training that's needed, but I think a lot of the skills that we're going to need are more IT skills. They're always in demand, but if more people are going to be working remotely, then we're going to need more skills to enable people to do that. And also, you know, we need to make sure that the well-being, the ability to manage teams remotely is going to get more and more important as well. So I think that we will need, you know, people need to know how to manage a team effectively remotely, how to lead an organisation remotely, but also how do you manage your staff to make sure that you keep their well-being, you know, in tip-top condition, because that is too important to allow people to suffer from isolation if they are working remotely. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks to our three panellists. I'm going to fly straight into the questions, and as you can imagine, a lot have already been tabled. I think I'm in the Assembly Parliament, but been given to us. The first question, and I'm not going to ask every single panellist every single question because we won't manage to get through enough, but the first question is for you, Jeremy, if I could get your opinion on this. Can you shed light on PPE recommendations from Welsh Government to businesses?
Yes, well, there are obviously some sectors where PPE is required, so health and care settings and related settings, so transport to health and care settings where there may also be a need for PPE, and there may be some aspects of emergency services as well where there is specific guidance around PPE which is published and it's on our website and it describes the kind of level of PPE required for different tasks. In terms of the economy at large and employers at large, there's no broad obligation in relation to PPE. The social distancing provisions, if they're complied with, do most of the heavy lifting in terms of public safety in those contexts. But what is clear is that all employers have an obligation to take all reasonable measures to comply with that 2 meter distance rule at work. Now, obviously, that will be more or less possible depending on the kind of workplace that you run. Clearly, it's not the same in all working environments. It's easier for some to adapt than others. And where an employer is not able to do that, then they need to ascertain what other steps they need to do a risk evaluation effectively and identify what other steps they can take short of that, which protects the employee. So, if you go to supermarkets, clearly at the checkout, it's not possible to maintain 2 meters between yourself and the person on the checkout, but there's a kind of glass visor there. And in some settings, PPE will be, part of that mix for employers. But that just depends very much on the kind of work that you do and, whether or not you can comply with that 2 meter rule.
Jeremy, the next question I'm going to ask you, Mark, if I could. The question is, I would like to explore the idea of how COVID could help us rethink workforce development for the fourth industrial revolution. You mentioned that phrase when you spoke to us earlier on.
Yeah, thanks, Carwyn. I'll try and keep it short. One of the most difficult questions to answer is always the simplest question, and I think we need to look at how we deliver our services or how we deliver our products, and ask the simple question, why? On numerous occasions through our organisation, the best answer I can give when I'm asked that is because we always do. So I think it's about challenging how we do things and looking at how we can do things better. Linda just mentioned about technology being a huge part of this process. It is, and it will be. And I think we've been talking about, the industrial or the fourth industrial revolution for a long time. I think we are now forced into looking at how we can do things which will take into account the extreme anxieties that people have at the moment in terms of returning back to work or returning to whatever the new normal is going to be like. So start by just asking that question, why? Why do we do things in the way that we currently do them, and challenge that internally?
Thank you, Mark. Linda, this one I'm going to ask you. You mentioned the new ways of working and the potential for social isolation if people work more at home. The question is this, the new normal means many of us will expect to continue to work from home rather than return to the office when it's all over. But what does this increased flexibility of the workforce mean for retaining and developing some of the major sources of employment in the Welsh economy, such as contact centres and financial services?
Well, I think probably a lot of those type of jobs can actually be done from home quite easily. So I suppose that it means that the expensive offices that people have to run will be be a reduced cost, a reduced overhead for businesses, which hopefully will mean that they'll be able to invest more of their income in staff themselves rather than buildings. So I think it is a positive. Certainly in terms of the environment, it's good because it means that people will be using their cars less. I think that there are lots of benefits from working from home, but I do think that there still needs to be some sort of hub. I think that what we're finding in only 7 weeks is that people are finding they are absolutely desperate to get that social contact with colleagues, to share experiences, just to talk things over. And although they don't need to do that 5 days a week, I think that there does need to be some way of people being able to have that communication, so they're not just stuck in their house. And Jeremy mentioned earlier about hubs, and I think that's something that we were progressing before COVID happened, to reduce work to home travelling, so that people could work within their own communities. And maybe that's the sort of thing that that will build up, that there will be hubs where maybe a number of different employers, they do exist now, but I don't think that they're terribly well used. But maybe things like that will develop more, so that you'll have a number of different businesses using a hub, so that people can have that social contact, but they can also work for a number of different organisations, but also reduce their carbon footprint by not having, maybe hopefully walking to work or cycling to work rather than having to take the car. So I think there are quite a lot of opportunities that we could see coming out of this. Benefits to people.
Thanks, Linda. There is a supplementary that we've been asked, which is how do we need to change our values and behaviours to adapt to new ways of working? I think you've already touched on that in your answer. Anything to add?
I think it's about just thinking about your customer in different ways as well. So you're thinking about them, sorry, you're thinking about them in, sorry, distracted. I think it's about being kinder to each other as well. I think that makes quite a difference.
Don't worry about that, Linda. I think the dog appeared behind me at one point.
It did.
I'm sure you can open the door.
Just come back from a walk.
It was just a little bit worrying, but this is what meetings are like these days, as we can see. Mark, I've got two for you. Okay, the first one I'd like to ask you is this: how do we encourage more true manufacturing? I suppose define true manufacturing back to Wales as a result of this pandemic, and what investment is envisaged to support new technology? I suppose needed, I'd use there for you, to support new technologies and infrastructure to support advanced and changing working practices.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Gary. We need to be aware of major employment events all the time, but I mean, we need to be aware of what, who is being enticed into Wales, what companies are being enticed into Wales, what manufacturing industries. Will the manufacturing industries look like they have done in the past? Probably not. We're probably talking about advanced technology manufacturing, but it is about how Wales attracts those people in. Now, I remember many years ago working with Swansea University on a project to bring a large manufacturing company into the area. And they walked away from the area because when they did an analysis of skills in the area, we didn't have the skill set that they required to come into that area. And what I mean by that, there were far too many areas with low level skills, and they were looking for, people who were level 3 and above. So I think, whatever we do around any industry, manufacturing being one of them, we have to have that nucleus of qualified people who can actually undertake those roles. Now, that is about a partnership between those people who are involved in economic development and bringing new technology and new manufacturing into an area, and those who are delivering education. It's no point in us finding out about those things, 6 months before they happen, because the whole process takes time. So I think it's about far more conversation, consultation and debate around this by the key players who are involved in this process.
Thank you, Mark. The next question is from a lecturer in higher education. And the question is this: how should we start to prepare undergraduates for working in the new normal? What are your thoughts in terms of, obviously, the students you have and students elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think I mentioned earlier about Royal Society of Arts and their publication saying that the 16 to 19-year-olds, 40% of those jobs are going to go, and 30% of jobs for the 20 to 24-year-olds. We know what the new industries are going to look like. And I think, you know, it was an American economist years ago who said that, you know, the top 3 or 4 jobs that exist today didn't exist 10 years ago. You know, so we're a little bit crystal ball gazing, but I think we need to prepare these students to understand, you know, what key work skills are about. And what I mean by that, I mean, Linda made a really good point about working from home. And there are going to be, you know, over 40% of the jobs in Wales can be done from home. The IFS was saying earlier on last month. I mean, if we can prepare people for that different type of working where they are going to be slightly isolated in terms of how they function, then I think we've got to have them used to that setup through the delivery that we use in actually providing them with the qualifications. I'm not sure how clear that is, but I think that the typical course provision in classes and that delivery, you know, within reasonably large groups is finished. Most of our sector went remote within 3 days. And I think that's how people are going to be used in the future. So it is about preparing them to work on their own, preparing them to be able to research on their own and the skills that they require to do that on their own. But fundamental to it all, Carwyn, will be technological skills and the development of technological skills, whatever area they work in.
Thank you, Mark. Next two for you, Jeremy. First one, can the new normal be used to end practices such as 0-hour contracts?
Well, I mean, I think it's what's obvious to all of us is how the COVID has, you know, impacted people in insecure employment, which can be insecure for a range of reasons, including 0-hours contracts. Obviously, how they, you know, how they've been particularly badly impacted by it. I think, you know, the government interventions, particularly the furlough interventions, didn't, you know, were constructed in a very conventional employment model and took a while to catch up and still haven't really caught up with most people in that category. So the answer to your question is, should it do that? Yes. That needs to be a, you know, we are committed in Wales to that kind of employment model, but the UK government under its current guise isn't, and we would need UK-wide commitment, I think, to changing the insecurities in employment across the UK. And as I say, some of it is around 0-hours contracts, some of it is around unpredictable hours. There's all sorts of ways in which employment for people is very, very vulnerable at the moment. But I also think that, you know, the way employers have responded to COVID has been varied, isn't it? Some have responded in a way which has been bluntly more supportive of their workforce than others. I do think people will form a clear view, I think, of companies and employers that have a strong sense of ethos, a strong sense of values, a strong sense of workforce development. And that is obviously what we want to see happening in the economy at large. That is the kind of employer, obviously, we want to support here in Wales. And I think that is going to become a much more important way of looking at the economy, even than it has been already into the future. But absolutely, there needs to be what Mark was saying earlier, and this is a point which came across again in one of the roundtables that I did, that sense of a social contract. We've seen, you know, people's perception of who's delivering value in the economy change very, very radically in the course of the last few weeks. People have also understood the role of government in supporting parts of the economy or in fostering parts of the economy. And I think that will, and I hope it will actually have a legacy in how we look at how we come out of the recovery. There will be a tension, you know, if we were looking at 10% hit to GDP and much longer term impacts than that, there will be a real impulse to stimulate the economy on any basis whatsoever to come out of COVID. That would be a very, very strong urge in large parts of the economy, but we've got to make sure that it happens in a way which reflects our values as well, both in terms of good employment, but also, as Linda was saying earlier, issues around sustainability and a green recovery is going to be absolutely at the heart of that.
Jeremy, the next question is specifically for you from somebody whose economic activity is in the field of outdoor group physical activity. I suppose aptly, they say being brutal, what sort of time frame should we be looking at before we can realistically trade?
Okay, well, that's obviously a really important, specific question, isn't it? I cannot give you a date today on which that is, going to give you any reassurance or guarantee. Obviously, what is happening today is the First Minister is about to publish our roadmap which describes the journey out of lockdown, which will give at least a sense of direction. We've chosen not to put specific dates in because we don't think that is bluntly a credible way of doing it. So much depends on the circumstances at the time, and I know that everybody on this call will have that as their most top priority in any case, to make sure that people are safe. That, I think, goes without saying. But we just have to assess those situations in light of the level of transmission in the community. What I would say, I mean, I don't know what, given that it's described as outdoor group physical activity, plainly, you know, what we do know is that the circulation of the virus outdoors is less rapid, as it were, than indoors. So that, you know, that's a positive from your point of view. But the group activity, again, you know, that requires social distancing, so that, you know, that tends in the opposite direction, if you like. I'm sorry I can't give you a specific idea about that, but we are, you know, the document published today, and it'll be published in a couple of hours, will, I think, at least give a sense of direction about how we want to lift lockdown.
In terms of hospitality,
I'm happy to circulate that. By the way, I can send it to Heather to circulate to attendees on the call.
That's helpful, thank you. And in terms of the hospitality sector, would your view be similar on that sector as well?
I think so, yes. I mean, the real concern that we have, and this may apply to the previous question as well, so forgive me if I didn't pick up on that. There are some parts of the economy that obviously have been particularly hard hit by COVID. Hospitality, tourism, and so on are one of those two of those sectors. And we're also really aware as a government that some of those sectors earn their revenues at particular parts of the year. So, you know, leisure, tourism, accommodation, you know, earn a significant amount of their revenue at Easter and summer. So coming back to normal, as it were, at the tail end of this year means you've lost that cycle of revenue, and we're very alert to that. We're very glad that the UK government has extended its furlough scheme, at least at this point, till October. What we now need to make sure is that we have, you know, we co-design that across the UK to make sure it reflects the local economies in different parts of the UK, really. That's what we're pressing for.
Thank you, Jeremy. Linda, if I can ask you this question. If we are all to work from home or remotely, there are two major issues. One is broadband capacity and reliability, and the other one is something you've touched on, which is the issue of mental health. How do we ensure that people are mentally well when they can't do their set routines or their normal activities? You mentioned that, as I said earlier on when you spoke to us. What would your view be on those two issues?
I think starting off with broadband capacity and bandwidth is something that we've been looking at as to whether, as an organisation, it's something we could invest in our areas where we have you know, a high level of houses. And I think it's something that maybe similar organisations like my own would be willing to look at, so that it's a benefit not only to our own workforce, but also to the communities that we serve, so that other people have opportunities to work from home as well, because I think probably it will become the norm, so that people will have to have that ability to do that. So, but it is going to need infrastructure investment. There's no doubt about that. You know, I don't think that it's only going to be businesses that can invest in that. You know, it is going to need support from government as well. But I do think that it is right that organisations that will benefit from it by not having to have the overheads in you know, big offices should put some of the money into investing in that. So I think on the broadband side, that would be my way forward. In terms of mental health, I did touch on it before. I think that there is probably a lot of training that we need to do. You know, as a manager and as a leader, I have very little experience of knowing how to manage the mental health of my staff. It is something that as an organisation we take really seriously and have done a lot of work in it. But I have very little experience of having to manage a workforce remotely. Yes, in different offices even across Wales, but not in, you know, maybe 500 different locations if people are working from 500 different homes. And I think that will take different skills and skills that we don't necessarily have now. But if we don't learn them, then those people that are working at home, you know, are potentially going to suffer with mental health issues. in terms of it just being socially isolated. So I think that, you know, maybe it's something that that Mark and his team can look at in terms of training, how to do that. We are putting on e-learning courses at the moment and seminars for our staff who've been at home for 7 weeks. So there are people out there who are offering these courses, and I'm getting very good feedback from them. But that isn't so much on how to lead a team. It's actually, you know, how to keep your health and well-being healthy whilst you are working from home. So I think we've got a lot to learn.
Thank you, Linda. Mark, if I can ask you this one. This is the way it's phrased. How do you solve the problem with challenges in recruiting high-skilled workers with a lack of funds to deliver training? So the first question is, do you think there is a lack of funds to deliver training? And if there is, how do we rectify that?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's a lack of funds. I think there is complexity in accessing the funds and understanding, you know, where those funds exist. We have a system in Wales where our apprenticeship programs, both degree apprenticeships, higher apprenticeships, and the normal apprenticeship programs, are fully funded by Welsh Government. It's very different in England, where, you know, we have the apprenticeship levy and so on that employers pay into. And okay, we still have to pay into that in Wales, which is a bit of an employment tax. But actually, if you want to access apprenticeship programs and skills training in Wales, it's actually fully funded by Welsh Government. There are also specific pots of money that Welsh Government have set aside to actually assist, you know, the skills development funds and so on, to assist employers with upskilling their staff. You know, what I would say to people is, you know, get onto our website, talk to our business advisors, because they have specialist knowledge about how you can tap into those funds. So in a really simple answer, Carwyn, no, I don't think that there is a lack of funding out there to fund it, but I do think that employers have to invest in funding as well. So I think there are two sides to that point. Okay,
I'm afraid we've run out of time. There's one final question which I'm going to ask all of you, if I may, and it's I'll come to you first, Linda, then Mark, then Jeremy at the end. Okay. The question is this: the new normal sounds like a reactive, short-stroke, mid-term solution. How can we plan now to make sure, or to make work more resilient in the face of the next pandemic or crisis? So how do we make ourselves more resilient in the future? Linda?
Well, I think we've actually discovered that we are very resilient and very agile. And I think that the whole country actually proved that when it shut down almost overnight, but still kept going in most sectors. But I think it's actually learning from that. I do think we are going to have a new normal. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way that we were. And I think it's just a case of slowly coming out of it. And I doubt that this will be the first time, or rather the last time, that we see something like that. We were already preparing for it because of Brexit. So, you know, a lot of what we were looking at in terms of shortages, we had already prepared for. So I think that we just need to build on the resilience that we have developed and actually discovered that we had already.
Mark?
Thanks, Carwyn. Yeah, I do think it is about changing our working practices. I think we've seen huge changes in our working practices in the last 2 months. But I do agree this is about building resilience into this model as well. Unfortunately, I agree with Linda, this is not the last time that we'll see some sort of horrendous pandemic. But I do think that a lot of us have learned lessons from what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and I think we'll learn from those lessons. And I agree that, you know, we've seen some enormous changes and preparedness for things like this, but actually I think we will still be better prepared next time this comes around, unfortunately.
And finally, Jeremy.
Well, firstly, I wouldn't agree, actually, that it's a short-term response. I think it's much more profound than that. I think what we're talking about is a complete shift. And the task isn't to go back to what things were like before. The task is to go back to to remake the things which we've understood for a long time, our vulnerabilities in our economy or in our social fabric and in our approach to the environment, and to get those right for the future. So the task isn't to restore what we had before, it's to develop a better vision of what we need to have for the future. So I wouldn't accept that it was a short-term response. It's a much bigger challenge than that. I would say there are three things. Firstly, we've learned, haven't we, what the casualisation of the economy has done across the UK in all sectors. Secondly, we learned the need to invest in infrastructure of different types, in particular digital infrastructure, but there will be others. And thirdly, I think, we've had 10 years of austerity across the UK, and public services are not as resilient as they would have been had that not been the case. So those are the lessons to learn from this process. I take heart in some ways that people, I think, have recognised in the horrible experience that everyone's been living through, that our choices and our behaviour has a contribution to make, but also that there are challenges that lie ahead of us. So, the climate change, we've barely talked about climate change today. Perhaps we've been focusing on other things, understandably, but that is a huge challenge which is sitting alongside this. And I think the way we have, the way we understood about how to prepare for some of these challenges, how to respond to them, both at an individual level, at a community level, and at a government level, needs to, I think, stand us in good stead for that significant challenge which lies ahead of us. But I think we also need to say that there have been some things which we have learnt to do better in the last few weeks. I think Mark or Linda mentioned it earlier. Things have been reformed rapidly in a matter of days, really, which otherwise would have taken months or sometimes years. So we need to not unlearn that behaviour, really. We need to try and keep that in the way of working into the future. And obviously we've learned to do things differently on an individual level. But one of the most striking things is a question about manufacturing, to Mark earlier. We've now managed to companies in Wales actually have repurposed their production lines to manufacture PPE and chemicals at scale as a consequence of this. And I think there's a lesson there as well about helping companies respond rapidly to opportunities, even when they arise from really awful circumstances like the ones we face now.
I thank our three panelists. That brings us to the end of the Q&A session. I'll now hand over to Paul, if I may, just to wrap things up. Paul.
Carwyn, thank you very much indeed. And I'm not going to even try and make an effort to summarise what we have touched on today. It's been a huge array of things. My specific thanks to Jeremy, to Mark and to Linda, and to our chair, Carwyn, for all of the work and preparation you've put into this. It's been hugely informative. Thank you also to our attendees. For your benefit, copies of this or recordings of this are available on our website and will be available on social media. It's worth referring to anybody who you think may take benefit from it. So from us at the South Wales Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to our speakers, thank you to our chair, and thank you to you, the attendees.